Good morning. Um, just as a reminder, Peggy has gone to Florida to love on that grandson of hers and her daughter and her son-in-law. So Jordan is taking over the administrative responsibilities. I think right now she's in the nursery at the moment, but she'll be with us in a little bit. So if you have any questions throughout the week, I think you had your email that Jordan's email was in Peggy's email. So yes, so contact her if you need anything, because I don't know a lot of stuff. I do the Bible study stuff, and Jordan and Peggy do all the other work, so. Okay, so as a review, Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute, has heard of the God of Israel. She believes he's the only God, and she joins him by hiding 2 Israelite men who have come to spy on her country. In return for the kindness she's shown to them, she asks them for a favor. And what's that favor? To save her and her family. And her and family included her father and her mother, her brothers and her sisters, so she has a pretty good-sized family, and everyone who belongs to them. So I'm assuming that's their children. So the spies agree that if she keeps their mission a secret, they will keep her family safe. They will keep them alive when they come to conquer Jericho. So let's get into it. Joshua chapter 2. And will someone be willing to read verses 15 and 16? Good. Thanks, Debbie. So verse 15 tells us that Rahab's house is actually built into the city wall. So we have talked about the countryside of Jericho. And hey, Luke, we need the screen up now. So we have talked about the countryside of Jericho, but we didn't talk much about Jericho itself. So I know that's a little bit of a fuzzy picture, but it's a lot better than the black and white picture I was going to hand out to you. So let's talk about, this is an artist's rendition of the Jericho walls, and as you know, they no longer exist because you've read Joshua chapter 6 before. So if you can tell on the bottom right, those are little men who are standing on the green, okay? Okay, so those, you have a picture of the size of that. So I had to look up a lot of information about this because I didn't know, and I got really kind of excited as to how magnificent these walls were. I looked up some information from Answers in Genesis. You guys know that ministry. And this is what they say. The walls of Jericho were structured on a 3-tiered plan. The mound or tell of Jericho, which would be up on the top left, okay, where the city would be, it was surrounded by a great earthen rampart, which ran from ground level where the men are standing, or at the very bottom, below them actually, is the ground level. And there was an embankment that rose up to a stone retaining wall, which is next to where the men are standing. That's a stone wall there. That was about 15 feet high. On top of that, you'll see a mud brick wall that was actually 6 feet thick, and another 25 feet high. So together, the 2 walls formed a fortification of about 40 feet. So to put that in perspective, if you were standing where the men are, you would be looking up into a 4-story building. It's pretty tall, and that's just the first wall, basically. Then you'll see that there is an embankment that continues to climb upwards. And the 3rd tier of the walls of Jericho was at the very top of the embankment. You see the other mud brick wall up there. And it was about the same thickness and height of the mud brick wall on top of the stone wall lower. So this illusion, if you were to stand at the bottom of, not where the men are, but even lower, if you were to stand at the bottom, you would be looking up at an embankment that stood nearly 10 stories tall. So if you think about that when you go to the city, you see a 10-story tall building. I'm a country girl. Okay, I am from New York, but Western New York. Let me make that clear. I've never been to New York City, but I have been to places like DC and Indianapolis, and I get overwhelmed by the height of buildings. So a 10-story building, for people who have been wandering a wilderness, this would look very intimidating. So to go a little bit more in my research here, we're talking about Rahab's house, right? That it was built into the wall. Well, from 1907 to 1909, about 100 years ago or so, there was a German excavation of the walls of Jericho. And there they found, on the north side of the city, along the lower wall, so not the one that's on the very top, the next tier down, on that lower wall to the north of the city, there was actually a portion of the mud brick wall still intact. That mud brick wall stood over 8 feet high. And what is more, there were houses built against that wall. And it is quite possible that this is where Rahab's home was. So her home was not up in the main part of Jericho, it was down in the lower section. From this location on the north side of the city, it was only a short distance to the hills of the Judean wilderness where the spies hid for 3 days, which we're going to talk about today. Real estate values must have been low down here since the houses were positioned on the embankment between the upper and the lower walls. It's not the best time to live in during war. This area was no doubt the overflow from the upper city and the poor part of town, perhaps even a slum district. And you can see why Rahab may have lived there, okay? Just to give you an idea. So you can take that down if you can. If not, it's okay. Luke? Yes?
What is amazing is if she lived on that lower wall, she had all that distance to go through that ground to get to her place.
So, Luke, can you put it up? I'm sorry. So her house would have been behind, like, remember her house was on the wall. The wall of the city was probably the wall of her house, and the window would go out. So in order to go, I don't know where the gates were. I mean, the gates are going to be on the bottom and on the top, but she would have had to go up to go into her home from the bottom. I mean, everything was up. So I guess I don't know what you're asking.
But see that piece of mound of dirt
Mm-hmm.
that's white?
Mm-hmm. It's a cross section. So that's the dirt underneath, yeah.
Right. So in order for her to get to that lower part from the inside of her town, inside of Jericho,
Mm-hmm.
you would think she'd have, there'd be have to be a long wall,
Mm-hmm.
hall, not a wall, long hall that goes through there.
Right, and we know from different castles or walls of cities, there were probably double gates, some at the bottom, and then if they had to go back up and all hide in the city. Now, we'll find out next week when we talk about the Battle of Jericho, that Jericho was only about 9 acres big, so you can see why they could go around the city once in a day. So yeah, everything was up. It's kind of like living in West Virginia, right? Everything's on a hill. So yeah, so I hope that gives you an idea. That was impressive to me. A 10-story building, that would have been very formidable to someone. And you can see why Jericho may have trusted in their walls, because that's really difficult with the technology of the day to break through walls, let alone going uphill all the way, right? So verse 15 says that she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And you can kind of picture that now, can't you? Verse 16, and she said to them, meaning the spies, go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward, you may go your way. So not only does Rahab help them escape the city by means of the rope, but she gives them valuable information to avoid capture once they get out of the city. Now, being a citizen of Jericho, Rahab was acquainted with the countryside and also with the habits and the patterns of the king's men. Let's talk about the countryside first. She tells them to go into the hills. Do you remember in week 1, we talked about Jericho and how it had two names, the City of the Palms, which talked about its fertility in that area being in the Jordan River Valley. But also another name was the City of the Moon. Remember? Because it was a reference to the crescent-shaped plain in which Jericho sat. So the mountains helped form a crescent shape around Jericho. So the hills were a range of white limestone that had perforated caves in the sides of them. They were perfect hiding places. So she was able to tell these men, go into the hills and hide there for 3 days. So she knew of these caves there that they could hide in. Not only did she know the countryside, but she also knew the habits and the patterns of the king's men. Do you see here it says, go into the hills that the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Do you remember which direction? We read about it in verse 7. Which direction were they, you don't have to tell like north, south, east, or west, but which direction were they heading? Did Rahab direct the king's men to go? Do you remember? Toward the Jordan, which was east of the city. Good. So they're going that direction. She's sending them, we don't know exactly where she's sending them, but if her home was in that section that was still found in 1907, it would have been north. But she sent them to the hills, the opposite direction of the Jordan. Because remember, the Israelites were camped in Shittim, right across the Jordan River from Jericho. So it would make sense for the spies to try to get out of Jericho and go towards Shittim to be back to their home base. But she sent them in the opposite direction because she knew which way they were going, because she told them that they had left, right? Remember, she told the men that the spies had left, and so they headed toward the Jordan thinking they were headed toward their camp. But somehow, and I don't know how, I think maybe it was just her being on the wall and knowing what the king's men would normally do. She knew they would be back in 3 days. And I don't know how she knew that. But they would be back in 3 days. And she said then the spies could be safe to come down from the hill country to sneak back across the Jordan River to their camp. Would someone be willing to read verses 17 to 20? Yeah, thank you. Remember back in verse 14, the spies promised Rahab that they would deal kindly and faithfully to her. Remember, we talked about that at the end of last week's lesson. So here again in verse 17, they say the same thing. We will be guiltless with respect to this oath that you've made us swear. So they said, we promise, right? They're promising to do this. But there are a few conditions. And what were those conditions that Joellen just read? There are 4 of them. Right. Who's not to go outside the house? Okay. Right. Right. Okay, so no one's supposed to go outside the house. What are the 3 other conditions there? Yeah, the scarlet cord had to be in the window. Don't tell our business. And kind of piggybacking on what Linda said, the 4th condition would be that she has to bring them to the house. They can't just be going guessing where all her family is. They all had to be in the house with the scarlet cord, and they couldn't tell anyone their business. Matthew Henry, that old Puritan preacher that I love, he says this about the scarlet cord. The same cord she used to save them would save her. And with her family being gathered and having to stay inside, they would have to remain separate from those who are around them. So in page 79 of our workbooks, this is day 4 when we're talking about the idea of covenant, the binding promise. Talking a little bit about how God makes covenants with us, but also in the middle of page 79, we were asked this question. How did the scarlet cord represent the covenant between Rahab and the spies?
She protected them, and in exchange, they can save her.
Okay. Okay. Okay, yeah.
It said it outwardly showed her obedience.
It outwardly showed her obedience. Yep. Good.
I think it was something recognizable because, like you said, they were saved by this cord, and so they would be the only ones that knew of like what this cord represented. Like no one, everyone else would have just seen it and it would pass right by.
Right. Yeah, everyone in Jericho, I mean, they're all tucked in anyway because everyone's keeping close to home because these Israelites are just across the Jordan River. So,
Prostitutes also, the red light district.
yeah, I wonder, yeah. Red is a very interesting color for her profession. We don't know. Maybe she did have some sort of signal. Yeah, we don't know that. Yeah. Any other responses to how the scarlet cord represented the covenant? Terry?
I'm thinking just as we're talking, that really the covenant was between her and God, because only God could have protected that home as they marched around the 7 times. They had, because she made the covenant with the spies, it really was a God covenant. He's the only one that could keep that portion of the wall from falling down.
Right. Yeah, and in a sense it was. Now, we don't, at this point in the story, the spies don't even know that the walls are going to come a-tumbling down. They don't know that. No one knows. Even Joshua doesn't know at this point. God will give it to him later, and we'll read about that. But no one knows the walls are going to come down. They don't know how quite God's going to do this. But as she makes the covenant with them, she really is making it with God. She's joining God's family, God's side of this situation. That's good. Any other ideas about how the cord represents the covenant? The color, yeah, we're going to talk about that. Yeah, the color. No, it's great. Thanks for wearing red today too, Emily. Isn't that Wonder Woman? Yes. I wrote down that the cord signifies who the covenant was made with. It distinguishes her house. And Rahab's trust that they're going to keep their part of the deal. And the fact that she wanted to be saved. I know that sounds very simplistic, but she wanted to be saved. She heard about the threat, she knew the threat, and she acknowledged, I'm going to die if I don't join in with these people. So she wanted to be saved. Verse 21 in Joshua 2. So there's conditions to them keeping their promise. And she says in verse 21, according to your words, so be it. Then she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. So basically, Rahab is saying there, according to your words, so be it. She's like, deal. I'll make that deal with you. And I love this last sentence, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. She wastes no time, does she? She's not waiting till the Israelites come. She's not like frantically, she's not last minute. She's putting it in right away in that window to signify her trust. Now, what would have happened if she had gathered her family, stayed inside, and told no one their business, but had not tied the rope in the window? What would have happened? They would all have been killed. Why? Part of the covenant, right. And it was a very practical part of the covenant because, right. So right now, only the 2 spies know this, but they're headed back to Joshua. And we'll find next week how Joshua tells everyone the red cord is our signal, basically. We're not killing Rahab and her family, anyone who's in there. So, right. The Israelites wouldn't have known who to keep alive. So they wanted to keep that promise to Rahab. On page 71 in our workbooks, sorry, we're going backwards. You guys are so patient with me and my wandering around in this workbook. This is day 1. Talking about her putting the cord in the window right away. In the middle of page 71, Nancy says she, meaning Rahab, obeyed all the way, right away. And isn't that what we train our kids with? Obey me all the way, right away. The next question, what does disobedience of God ultimately reveal about our trust of God? That it lacks. Simple, right? Alicia?
That we do not trust or believe in what he has said or believed.
Ooh, yeah. We don't believe in what he says about anything or what he says about himself. We don't trust him. Beth?
I think it goes to love too, because he says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. So it's a lack of love if you're not obeying my word.
Yeah. Were you at my house today? I just read that verse today. Yeah, it's in John 14. If you love me, you'll obey my commands. She said it's showing love for the Lord by being obedient to him. And a lack of love if we're disobedient. That's what she was saying. Anything else that you put there? How about the next question? Think of a time when you obeyed something the Lord asked you to do. And what was the result? Alicia? Adopting your girls. Yeah, the result. Wow. Yes, I know you are. Anyone else? Joellen?
I told myself that when I turned 65, I was going to quit teaching here. And I said 70. Maybe 70. I told the Lord, as long as I have the physical energy and mental energy, I want to keep doing it.
Yeah, and
I love it, and I want to be able to keep doing it.
yeah, and what a blessing it's brought on others. Also, your obedience to keep on going. Yeah, that's beautiful. Debbie.
I moved from Maryland to Arkansas 4 years ago to take care of my mom. And I loved my mom, but we were never close. We weren't friends. And the result of me moving back, they were the most tender, sweet parents. And a renewed love for her.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
It was a blessing.
Thank you. Yeah. So honoring her mom, even though they weren't close at the time, the Lord blessed them with good years. That's wonderful. Linda.
After my husband passed away, I was a little at loose ends. And my pastor talked to me into taking lay leadership courses and to get more involved in the church. And I think that was God's leading at that time.
And what did it result in for you, Linda? Purpose and growth in the Lord. Yeah.
And a new beginning in ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard being a widow.
Oh, yeah.
Probably are widows and stuff. And so we.
Mommy gave divorcee, so it's not any easier.
Emily?
We moved out of California following the Lord's will, and my husband gets a job completely out of his field with no background training, and he's solid job security.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened without him.
Oh, yeah. So they left California, and her husband got a new job outside of his
Musical theater to property management.
musical theater to property management. But it's been a blessing. It's secure in construction. Okay. Yeah. So just obeying the Lord and trusting. Sounds like Abraham and Sarah almost. Just going where he tells us. Terry?
I didn't name any particular one because there's a lot of them that's happened in my life. When following the Lord, whether he answers my prayer according to the way I would like for him to, I always try to say that your will be done, Lord. There is a peace. It's a peace that you feel, as you are going through whatever you're going through, you feel his peace.
That's a blessing of obedience, isn't it? Peace. Even if it's not perfect, the life isn't perfect.
Yeah, because I really honestly think that we're lucky in the sense that he doesn't answer all of our prayers according to the way we
Mhm.
pray.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because he knows best for us, you know.
Yeah, so good. Peace. Sue, you had your hand up.
Just that when we moved down here, we never expected to be starting this church.
Mhm.
So, I mean, God, he works in mysterious ways, and just to take two guys that were middle-class workers and to do work in them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Lord.
Yeah, we do thank the Lord, and we like.
It makes me cry just thinking about what a blessing,
Yeah. Kind of like what we were talking with Joellen, like you obey and you are blessed, but then the blessing just spills out onto others too. And Alicia's family too. Her girls now have a home and a mom and a dad and two crazy brothers. And I love them. Yeah. Yeah, so good. How about that next question? Think of a time when you disobeyed or delayed obeying something the Lord asked you to do. What was the result? And you don't have to give details so much as maybe like what Terry and Sue were talking about, like the peace, the blessing. What were the results of the disobedience? It turned out bad. It turned out bad, period. Terry.
I put my soul felt turmoil.
The opposite of the peace of obedience.
Until you give in to God.
Yeah.
You're fighting. It's kind of like Joseph. That wasn't it Joseph that fought the Lord?
Oh, Jacob?
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Jacob. Yeah.
Yeah.
Finally gave in, but he wouldn't let
The Lord go.
go, and
Yeah.
so he blessed it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's a lot of turmoil.
Yeah, there is. Alicia.
I think there's also a missed opportunity when there's times where I felt the Lord saying, hey, you need to text this person, write them a note, do something, and I didn't. There's times I have, but there's other times, and then you find out later, they really needed something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guilt.
Guilty? You feel guilt? Yeah. Sue?
It can help hurt your health also.
Mm.
I struggle constantly as well. So when I'm not doing anything to help myself, it does definitely affect, my knees.
Or even, what does the Lord tell us not to be anxious about anything? We all know that anxiety and worry does affect us physically.
And when we're fighting against God, the result takes longer. The right result. And sometimes he leaves us to our own.
That's scary, isn't it? To be left to. I was just reading in 2 Chronicles, I think it was King Hezekiah. He did a great job, obeyed the Lord so much of his life, and then it says the Lord left him to himself, and he became prideful, and that scared me. I was like, Lord, don't leave me to myself. Please don't leave me to myself. So.
After he prayed, the Lord wouldn't let him die. Turned his face towards the wall, crying.
Right, yeah.
Go back in and tell him.
Yeah. Well, and then, yes, that's part. And then he brought the Babylonians and showed off his wealth to the Babylonians. And that gave the Babylonians a good idea of what was in Jerusalem. And I had never caught that before. I was like, what were you doing? Right? Yeah. Linda. Yes, loose lips sink ships. That's right. World War II. Yeah, that's a good slogan. I knew that one. Anything else about how disobedience, what was the result of disobedience for you?
I think mine would be the same kind of as Alicia when she was talking about, having that prompting from the Holy Spirit to invite somebody or just to talk to them, invite them to Bible study. As a new believer, I was told, or I heard this phrase, like, obey every impulse of the Holy Spirit. And I remember as a young believer, it's hard to do that because you just don't really know if you can't discern it at the moment. But I remember very distinctly, too, about inviting somebody and, like, realizing how much they could have needed that time or the message. Have you ever heard like a message and you're like, oh, and didn't do it, you know, that almost felt like, wow, I hindered them,
Mm.
hindered their walk, or, you know, their opportunity to hear the gospel. And so I think that was something I always try to keep in the back of my mind, is just to like obey that impulse whenever I feel the prompting.
Yeah, that's good. And you had said something about hindering someone. I was thinking we all have circles of influence, whether they're children or grandchildren or neighbors or siblings, whatever that might be, and how our disobedience really does affect other people. And how I was thinking when I answered this, I was a poor example to my children, and they saw everything. Now, of course, I can go back and make that right, but I did set a poor example for my kids.
But I have such a blessing to
Anne says nothing. Linda says she's such a blessing to her sister, and she is.
Well, I think in our family, we've been very blessed. Our brothers, we came from a large family, so there were 4 girls and 3 boys, and I broke the tie. And all of us, except one brother in California, live in Martinsburg still to this day. Our one brother was in the Air Force for a career, and then when he retired, he came home to Martinsburg as well. And it's, especially with the 3 sisters now, it seems like when we get the feeling that we need to call one or the other, you know, and it's right at the right moment when that sister needed it, you know, and it ends up being a blessing on you, you know, if you listen to the, you know, the God wink that you need to call.
Yeah.
And, you know, that has happened many times within our family. And so,
Yeah. Obedience leads to blessing.
I mean, you
Yeah.
get friends and stuff too.
Yeah.
I have a friend that, you know, is really, you know, we are really close. Well, there's three friends of us that are really close. And, you know, is sometimes one of them will contact me and, you know, right at the right moment and vice versa.
Yeah. So good.
And we have one friend that lives in Hagerstown, and she recently lost a friend that she had known for 40 years. And even though the lady had been in ill health, it was, she died at home, unbeknownst. And finally her sons realized that there was something wrong, so they went and she had fallen and you know, and died. And so, you know, I sent one of these little caricature type things, and then the father of her children recently he's in hospice, and he's being taken off of life support. And her girls are really upset over it, and
Of course.
it's her ex-husband. And so I just, you know, I sent her a little
Yeah.
thing, a little animated thing. It was like a dog and a kitty cat
Yeah.
playing with each other. And it had a caption under, "Sending hugs to you today."
And you didn't know all these things were going on, or did you know?
I did
Okay.
know partially,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think